"We all have our lines," David muttered under his breath, "but some lines are meant to be crossed." The words echoed in his mind as he stood before the rusted, padlocked storage unit. The key had been handed to him as a routine task. Unit 327 was abandoned, like countless others. But this one felt different. It wasn't the eerie stillness around the unit or the inexplicable chill in the air. It was the smell. A faint but acrid odor, like burning incense and rotting wood, seeped from the edges of the steel door. David adjusted his gloves, unlocked the latch, and with a groaning creak, pulled the door open. A dim light from the corridor spilled in, illuminating the hoarded chaos within. Shelves of dusty tomes with cracked spines, jars filled with murky, unidentifiable liquids, and odd artifacts. And in the center, atop a tattered oriental rug, sat an ornate box, its intricate carvings glowing faintly as though alive. David was no stranger to abandoned treasures. He even kept a few curiosities in his own home. But this box was something else. It was locked tight, the keyhole shaped like an open mouth. The carvings seemed to depict twisted, writhing figures, all converging toward a central gaping maw. He tried to push down his unease, picking the box up to inspect it closer. A low hum buzzed in his ears when he touched it, like static just on the edge of perception. "Forget it," he whispered. He set it back down, but as he moved toward the exit, the hum grew louder, more insistent. He found himself turning around, his legs moving of their own accord. The box wasn't just strange, it was calling him. Despite every instinct screaming at him to leave it alone, David grabbed the box and carried it out. That night, David couldn't stop thinking about the box. It sat in the corner of his living room, seemingly innocent, but commanding his every thought. By midnight, he gave in. Using a small screwdriver, he tried to jimmy the lock. The moment the latch clicked, an icy wind swept through the room. Every light in the house flickered and dimmed. David's breath fogged in the sudden chill. He slowly opened the lid, revealing nothing. Nothing but darkness, as if the box contained a void. He leaned closer, peering inside. That's when it happened. A shadow burst forth like smoke, swirling and twisting, filling the room with a suffocating presence. David stumbled back, gasping. He felt unseen eyes on him, heard whispers that weren't words, but promises of terror. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the shadow vanished. But the room wasn't empty anymore. On the wall, a faint black mark had appeared, like a handprint burned into the paint. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia. Shadows moved in the corners of David's vision. Objects in his house shifted when he wasn't looking. The black handprint grew larger, its edges curling like tendrils. At work, Unit 327 was padlocked again, but no one could explain why. No one was supposed to touch that unit, his supervisor told him gravely. It belonged to an exorcist, a priest of sorts. Rumor is he stored things. David didn't sleep that night. The shadows in his home grew bolder. One of them whispered his name. Desperate, he shoved the box into a closet, locking it away, but it was too late. Whatever he had released wasn't bound to the box anymore. It was bound to him. Through frantic research, David uncovered the history of Unit 327's owner. The exorcist, Father Alaric Vaughn, was said to have contained unspeakable evils within artifacts and relics, locking them away to protect humanity. The box, it seemed, was the crown jewel of his collection, a prison for a malevolent entity. But now, the entity was free. David found Vaughn's address, though the man had been dead for years. Vaughn's home was an old, crumbling estate filled with religious iconography and handwritten journals. In the last entry, Vaughn wrote, "The box must never be opened. To do so is to invite the abyss into our world. But should the seal be broken, only fire and faith can bind the darkness again." David's hands shook. Fire and faith. How was he supposed to fight something he couldn't even see? David returned home to find his living room in chaos. The box was back on the table, its lid wide open. The shadows in the room coalesced, forming a towering figure with glowing red eyes. The entity had taken shape. Clutching a makeshift torch, a broomstick wrapped in rags and soaked in lighter fluid, David stepped forward. He muttered every prayer he could remember as he lit the flame. The creature lunged, and David swung the torch wildly. The fire seemed to hurt it, causing the shadows to recoil and scream, a sound like tearing metal and human wails. Summoning every ounce of courage, David threw the torch into the box. Flames engulfed it, spreading quickly to the surrounding room. As the fire consumed his home, the shadows writhed and screamed before finally evaporating. David stumbled outside, coughing, watching as the entity was swallowed by the inferno. Weeks later, David stood in the ashes of his home, feeling a strange sense of peace. The box was gone, or so he thought. On his final day at the storage facility, he noticed something strange. A new unit, Unit 666, had appeared in the system. No record, no key. When he approached it, the same acrid smell hit him like a punch to the gut. David froze. His hands trembled as he turned to leave, the faint hum of the box already echoing in his mind. The unclaimed box never truly leaves. David didn't return to the storage facility the next day, or the day after that. But the smell lingered in his thoughts, just like the hum in his ears. It was as if Unit 666 had followed him, its presence seeping into every corner of his life. A week later, David received an anonymous letter. It was written in hurried, almost illegible script. You can't outrun it. The box chooses its keeper. You've been marked. His blood ran cold. That night, shadows began creeping back into his life, faint at first, then bolder. Objects moved again. Whispers called his name. He knew the fire hadn't ended it. Whatever he had unleashed wasn't bound by fire or faith or anything he understood. The following night, David drove to the storage facility, compelled by something stronger than fear. He parked outside and stared at the building, now dim and lifeless, as if it too had been claimed by the box. Inside, Unit 666's door was wide open, though David hadn't touched it. The corridor lights flickered, and his breath fogged in the air as he stepped closer. He didn't want to look inside, but his body betrayed him, moving as if controlled by unseen strings. The box was there, pristine, as if untouched by the fire. Around it lay charred fragments of the objects from Unit 327, symbols of failure. The carvings on the box had changed. They now depicted a solitary figure being consumed by darkness. David reached for it, but this time he hesitated. The memories of his burning home flashed in his mind, along with the screams of the entity. He thought of Father Vaughn's journals and the note he'd received. If the box couldn't be destroyed, could it be contained again? I won't let you win, he whispered. Desperation led David back to Vaughn's estate, where he scoured the ruins for answers. Among the ashes, he found an intact journal, its pages filled with detailed rituals. One passage stood out. To seal the darkness, one must give what it craves most, the soul of its keeper. A sacrifice binds it anew. David's hands trembled as he closed the book. He had hoped for a solution that didn't involve death, but Vaughn had known the truth. The box didn't merely trap entities, it demanded a tether. That night, David prepared. He drew the sigils as described in the journal, lit candles of blessed wax, and placed the box at the center of the circle. He knelt before it, staring into the endless void within. Take me, he whispered, but you'll take no one else. The moment the words left David's lips, the box shuddered violently. A deafening roar filled the room as the entity emerged once more, its form darker and more monstrous than ever. It loomed over him, its eyes like burning coals. David didn't flinch. He held his ground, staring into the abyss as its tendrils reached for him. Pain surged through his body as the shadows consumed him, but he felt no fear, only relief. As the entity enveloped him, the sigils on the floor began to glow. The room trembled, and the box slammed shut with a resounding clang. Silence followed. When the light returned, the box sat alone in the circle. The carvings had changed again, now depicting David's face, his eyes closed in eternal rest. Months passed, and the storage facility returned to its routine. Unit 666 was never mentioned again, its door remaining locked and unmarked. Employees avoided it, and new clients were warned not to touch certain units. But the box waited. One day, a new worker arrived, young, curious, and unaware. While cleaning the aisles, he noticed a faint hum emanating from Unit 666. "What's in there?" he asked his supervisor. "Just don't touch it," came the curt reply. But the hum grew louder as he walked away, tugging at his thoughts. By the end of his shift, he found himself standing before the unit, key in hand. He hesitated, but only for a moment.